They say home is where the heart is. But for Leo Marsten, home was a dimly lit kitchen that smelled of reheated leftovers and dreams that never made it past the dinner table. That night, as the old kitchen lamp buzzed faintly above, something inside him knew this wasn't going to be just another quiet evening. The brochure on the table glared back at him like an accusation, a glossy image of a golden retriever with bright, innocent eyes. His mother traced the dog's outline with a smile, and his father folded the paper like it held more promise than the letter Leo clutched in his trembling hand. The hospital had called earlier. The scheduling window for his spinal fusion surgery had opened up. It was sooner than expected, but it was now or maybe never. Leo had rehearsed this moment so many times in his head, how to bring it up, how to make it matter. His voice barely cut through the quiet. They confirmed the date, next week. I can get it done before classes get too heavy. No one looked up. His mother let out a delighted gasp, not at his words, but at a video of a puppy wagging its tail on her phone screen. "Ellie will love this one. Look at that little face," she said. Ellie, his 13-year-old sister, the golden child, the center of their world. Leo tried again. "It's a spinal fusion. The doctor said waiting any longer could lead to complications." That was when his father finally responded. Without looking at him, without even pausing his folding, he said, "You've lived with that back for years, Leo. It hasn't killed you, but Ellie, she only gets one childhood." It felt like being erased. Not rejected, just made invisible. The words hung in the room like cigarette smoke, staining everything. Leo's fingers tightened around the envelope in his hand. The medical report, the cost breakdown, the consent forms. None of it mattered. Not when he wasn't the child they were fighting for. He said nothing. Just nodded and quietly placed the papers back into his folder. The puppy video played on. His mother laughed softly. His father reached for the coffee pot. Ellie walked into the room, beaming, asking what names they should consider for the dog. That night, Leo lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to his sister trying out names through the paper-thin walls. Snowy, Bella, Marshmallow. Her voice was full of joy. And in that joy, Leo realized something bitter and freeing all at once. They had made a choice, not between a dog and a surgery, but between a daughter they understood and a son they didn't want to. The pain in his spine pulsed with every breath, but it was nothing compared to the quiet scream buried in his chest. He wasn't angry. He was exhausted. He had spent 3 years since coming out trying to prove he was still worthy of love. Maybe some things weren't meant to be begged for. Maybe some things had to be built alone. As the night deepened and Ellie's voice softened into sleep, Leo turned toward the wall, pulled the blanket over his shoulder, and whispered the hospital date to himself. Then he closed his eyes, not to rest, but to begin preparing for the day he'd walk into that surgery alone. Because sometimes, survival isn't about being saved. It's about knowing when to stop asking and start becoming. If this story touched something in you, don't forget to follow Heart Story for more real, raw, and healing tales. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we never thought we'd survive to tell. Leo Marsten didn't confront his parents again. There was no shouting match, no late-night argument, just silence and a quiet decision. If they had made their choice, then so would he. The morning after the puppy arrived, the house erupted with celebration. Ellie bounced around in her pajamas, shrieking with joy as Snowy clumsily tumbled across the tiles. Leo watched from the hallway, hands deep in the pockets of his hoodie, spine aching under the weight of betrayal. The dog barked. Ellie laughed. Their mother filmed everything for social media. Their father smiled, like this was the beginning of a new chapter. In another room, Leo opened his laptop and searched for something else entirely. Student loans, emergency medical financing, signatures required, parent cosigner. He stared at the line where his mother's name was supposed to go. Then he reached for a pen. The signature wasn't perfect, but it would do. With the forged document uploaded and the application submitted, Leo felt something unfamiliar, control. For once, he wasn't waiting to be seen. He was moving. The weeks that followed blurred into exhaustion. He went to class when he could, missing lectures when the pain flared too high. He took extra shifts at the campus library, cataloging returned books with fingers that trembled when his back locked up. No one asked questions. No one looked closely enough to see a 19-year-old boy holding his entire body together with breath and willpower. Snowy became an internet star. His mother's posts racked up likes, Ellie and her fluff ball. Best surprise ever, all while Leo learned how to inject himself with pre-surgery medication. The disconnect felt surreal. His world was narrowing to a countdown to the day he'd be wheeled into a sterile operating room with no one in the waiting area. Still, Leo didn't tell anyone. Not friends, not professors, not even Ellie. It wasn't until the night before the surgery that he finally spoke. Dinner had just ended. Snowy lay curled under the table. His father was scrolling on his phone, and his mother was folding laundry. Ellie had gone upstairs. Leo stood by the sink, clutching a glass of water he couldn't bring himself to drink. He turned to them slowly, voice calm but hollow. "Tomorrow I'm getting the surgery." No reaction, just the rustle of cotton. The tick of the clock. "I'll take the bus, I've arranged it. Don't worry, no one has to come." His father looked up briefly, confused. "Surgery, I thought you dropped that." Leo's laugh was soft and tired. "I didn't, you just stopped listening." His mother said something about how stressful the past few weeks had been, that maybe they could talk about this later, that he didn't have to be dramatic. He didn't argue. He simply nodded and excused himself. That night, as the rest of the house settled into its familiar rhythm of comfort and distraction, Leo packed his bag, a clean t-shirt, a list of medications, his ID, and a small notebook where he'd written down everything he needed to remember in case he couldn't speak after the surgery. The last thing he saw before turning off the lights was Ellie's bedroom door. A pink sign hung crookedly from the handle. It read, "Do not disturb. Snowy and I are busy." He smiled without bitterness. This wasn't about revenge, it was about release. He had spent so long begging for recognition, but now he would carve out dignity with his own hands, even if they were shaking. Sometimes, the moment we stop waiting to be rescued is the moment we begin to rise. Even if it means walking alone toward the operating table. Even if no one is there to wave goodbye. Because courage isn't always loud. Sometimes, it sounds like a soft voice whispering to itself in a quiet bedroom. "You're doing this. You're doing this anyway." And that's how we learn no matter who abandons us, we're still worth showing up for. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and uncertainty. Leo Marsten stepped through the automatic doors just after sunrise. A thin hoodie pulled over his shoulders and a folded consent form clutched in one hand. His backpack bumped awkwardly against his spine, which ached more with every step. He was alone, just like he said he would be. At the check-in counter, the nurse glanced up, eyes scanning him for a parent, a guardian, someone who would sign beside him. But Leo already had the paperwork, already had the answers, already had the lie. He was 19. Legally enough, emotionally, that was harder to measure. They gave him a plastic bracelet and a hospital gown, told him where to go, how to change, what to expect. He nodded at every instruction, even as his hands trembled and his mouth dried out from nerves. When the nurse stepped out, Leo stood in front of the bathroom mirror, examining the way his body bent slightly, almost unnoticeably, except to someone who lived inside it. The spine that curved wrong, the shoulders that compensated, the pain that never announced itself with screams, but whispered steadily through every movement. He took a breath, then another, then changed into the gown. Pre-op was a blur of beeping monitors and crisp white sheets. No visitors, no soft voices, just clinical efficiency, until Tyler walked in. He wasn't wearing a white coat, just dark green scrubs and a lanyard that read physical therapy, staff. His hair was buzzed close, and he looked like someone who had seen things most people couldn't bear. But when he saw Leo, something in his eyes softened. "You're Leo?" he asked gently. Leo nodded, too tense to speak. "I'll be seeing you through recovery. I just wanted to introduce myself before you go under. I know surgeries can feel big, but you're not alone here." It was the first time anyone had said that in weeks. Leo wanted to thank him, but the words got stuck somewhere between his fear and the anesthetic. When the team came to wheel him in, Tyler gave a small nod from behind the curtain, a quiet promise. "You'll come out the other side." The operating room was cold, the lights too bright. Machines blinked and buzzed while voices checked and rechecked every detail. Then came the countdown, and then darkness. At home, Snowy began to choke on a piece of rubber toy. Ellie screamed. The chaos that followed was the kind of noise that demanded attention. The dog was rushed to an emergency clinic. Ellie sobbed uncontrollably, clinging to their mother's arm. Their father barked orders over the phone. It was the first time in weeks the family moved as one. In the middle of the panic, the hospital called, not about the dog, about Leo. A polite voice asked if anyone was planning to check in on the patient. Surgery had gone well. He was resting. The silence on the other end lasted too long. When Leo opened his eyes, it was dark outside. Machines beeped steadily around him. Pain pulsed through his back, not sharp, but deep and insistent, like the throb of something healing from within. Someone was holding his hand. "Tyler, you're okay," he said, his voice calm and grounded. "It's over." Leo blinked against the weight of the world returning. An hour later, his parents showed up. His mother entered first, still wearing her emergency vet bracelet. His father followed, carrying a tray of gas station coffee. Their eyes were tired, guilty, unsure. Leo didn't say much. He didn't cry, didn't yell, just looked at them both and said, clearly and quietly, "I did what you always wanted me to do. I took care of myself." No one replied. Snowy was fine. The toy had passed. Ellie was home, shaken but okay. Everything, somehow, had returned to normal. Except Leo. He wasn't the same boy who begged at the kitchen table. He was now someone who had gone to the edge, cut open, stitched back together, and returned without applause. Someone who had learned that sometimes the absence of support reveals not just pain but possibility. Healing doesn't always start with love from others. Sometimes, it starts when we accept that the love we need might have to come from ourselves first. And that too, can be enough to begin to. Recovery wasn't heroic. It was slow, exhausting, and riddled with moments that felt like failure. But Leo Marsten met it head on. Every morning started with pain, not sharp like before, but dull, lingering, like the body's way of remembering what had been done to it. Tyler was there through it all, teaching him how to sit, how to breathe, how to walk without holding his lower back, encouraging him when his legs shook, catching him when his knees gave way. At first, Leo kept to himself, quiet, focused, but over time he began to speak just a little. Tyler never asked for details, but he listened to what Leo didn't say. And that, somehow, made all the difference. Meanwhile, at home, things shifted, not in grand, sweeping ways, but in small, quiet pivots. Snowy's near-choking incident had shaken Ellie. For the first time, she saw that joy could be fragile, that comfort could unravel without warning. She clung to the dog less like a toy and more like a companion. She also started doing chores unasked, folding towels, walking Snowy, even cooking scrambled eggs on Saturdays. Their mother, once dismissive of difficult conversations, began spending hours looking at online job boards. She signed up to be a part-time tutor, dusting off her college degree in English literature. Their father picked up evening delivery shifts, driving their old sedan through rain and wind to bring pizza and parcels to strangers. Then came the decision that startled Leo most. His parents offered to sell their SUV, the family's most valuable asset, to help pay down the debt from the medical loan. They had finally seen the paperwork, the forged signature, the risk Leo had taken alone. He didn't deny it, didn't defend himself. He simply said, "You don't have to sell the car or the dog. I don't want anyone giving something up for me. Not anymore." It wasn't pride that made him refuse. It was something deeper, a sense of agency. Of finally being in control of his own worth. They nodded. No arguments, just silence, laced with something that resembled respect. Back on campus, Leo returned to classes. He walked slower than before, with a careful step, but he walked. No cane, no brace. He worked long hours at the library and eventually earned a merit-based scholarship, enough to cover his second-year tuition. Tyler remained part of his life, not just as a therapist, but as a presence, quiet, solid, and familiar. They would sometimes meet for coffee after sessions. Talk about recovery, talk about art, talk about anything but the past. One afternoon, as Leo practiced walking stairs without support, he paused halfway up and looked down at Tyler. "Why do you do this? I mean, work with people like me?" Tyler smiled faintly. "Because someone once did it for me." There was no elaboration, no dramatic story, but in that moment, Leo understood something essential. Healing doesn't move in straight lines. Sometimes it loops, sometimes it echoes, and sometimes what we offer others becomes the repayment of a debt we didn't know we owed. At home, Ellie asked to volunteer at the local animal shelter. She told Leo she wanted to help dogs like Snowy find families who wouldn't give up on them. It was the first time she'd said something that sounded like it came from a deeper place. Leo watched her grow up that year, not just taller but more aware, more grounded, and somehow that made the pain worth it. The scars on Leo's back were beginning to fade, but more importantly, the shame he once carried in his chest had started to dissolve. He wasn't trying to be normal anymore. He was just trying to be whole, and that was enough. Because sometimes the most meaningful change comes not when people apologize, but when they start showing up differently. And when we stop waiting for others to rebuild us, we learn that we were capable of rebuilding ourselves all along. 12 months passed. The sun had just dipped below the city skyline, and string lights twinkled above the rooftop of Leo Marsten's dormitory. It wasn't a party in the loud, college sense, no blaring music or flashing lights, just a quiet celebration under open sky, laughter, homemade cookies, plastic cups filled with warm cider, and Leo, he stepped forward slowly, deliberately, no cane, no brace, no one guiding his arm. As he crossed the rooftop, each step was met with soft applause from his friends. Tyler leaned against the railing, watching with pride that didn't need words. Someone handed Leo a slice of cake. He smiled, accepted it, then walked to the center where the light hit just right. For the first time in years, Leo stood tall without pain, without pretending. "I didn't think I'd get here," he said softly, his voice barely above the breeze. "But I did." Somewhere near the back of the crowd, his parents stood holding a casserole dish of lasagna. His mother's eyes brimmed with tears, but she didn't cry. His father's hands were stuffed awkwardly into his coat pockets. They didn't try to take credit. They didn't try to apologize again. Instead, they stayed, and that, for once, was enough. Later that evening, when most guests had left, Ellie walked up to Leo. She was taller now, her hair pulled into a ponytail. She wore an oversized hoodie that said, "Adopt, don't shop." "Hey," she said, holding out a small cardboard box. "I wanted to give you this." Leo opened it slowly. Inside were crumpled dollar bills, a few coins, and a handwritten note. "Money from my part-time jobs, dog walking, birthday money, even some from Christmas. I didn't spend any of it." She looked down, her voice suddenly small. "Thank you for not making them give up, Snowy. Even when you could have." Leo didn't speak. He just pulled her into a hug and held her there. She whispered, "I was mad at you for a long time. You know, for being different, for making everything feel tense at home. But I didn't understand, not until Snowy almost died. Then I knew what it felt like to think you're about to lose something forever." Leo gently pulled back and looked her in the eyes. "I was never mad at you," he said, though barely above a whisper. "I just needed you to see." And she had. Later that night, when only a few remained, Leo sat beside Tyler near the edge of the rooftop. The air was cool, brushing gently against his cheek. Tyler reached into his coat pocket and handed Leo something old and worn. A folded postcard, yellowed edges, slightly torn. Leo opened it. On the back, in messy handwriting, were the words, "You don't know me, but I hope you never stop believing someone out there will care. One day, maybe that someone will be you. L.M." His breath caught. L.M. Leo Marsten. His own name. He stared at it in disbelief. "Where did you get this?" Tyler smiled. A little sad, a little grateful. "From a kid in a red coat at the winter shelter. Years ago, I was 17, alone. You were volunteering. You gave this to me with a cup of cocoa and a granola bar. You probably don't remember." Leo didn't, but suddenly, he did remember the coat, the cold, the boy who wouldn't meet his eyes, the quiet hope he'd tried to offer in just a few scribbled lines. And now, that boy, now a man, had helped bring him back to life. Leo stood by the railing, holding Snowy in one arm, the postcard in the other. His shirt lifted slightly in the wind, revealing the scar running down his back. He didn't hide it, because scars weren't proof of weakness. They were the architecture of survival. They showed where pain had lived and where healing had begun. And in that moment, Leo understood love wasn't about repayment. It was about returning when no one else had to. Now let me ask you this. If someone once helped you through the darkest moment of your life, would you even recognize them when it's your turn to carry them back? Or worse, have you ever ignored someone who was quietly saving you? Tell us what you would have done. Would you forgive your family like Leo did? Would you keep the dog? Would you have walked into surgery alone? Let us know in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, follow Heart Story for more stories that don't just entertain. They remind you you are not alone.